All right. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. Um, Greetings and welcome to The Ties That Bind, Black MSM, Crystal Meth, and Family. My name is Johnnie Ray Kornegay III, Network and Mobilization Director for the Counter Narrative Project, and I'll be one of your presenters today. This webinar is being presented in collaboration between the Counter Narrative Project, online at thecounternarrative.org, Harm Reduction Coalition, online at harmreduction.org, and Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, also known as Beam, online at Beam.Community. Just a bit of housekeeping before we begin. All participants will be on mute for the duration of this webinar. There will be 3 speakers, and they are all here and joining us today. And you can absolutely ask us questions, okay? So here's how you do that. You should locate the questions panel on your control panel. You will highlight the questions box to expand the panel. You will type your question in the box below, and you will press send. So I'm going to do that again. So to ask us a question, and you can ask us a question at any time throughout this presentation, you should expand the questions panel. You're going to type your question into the box, and you will press send. Thank you. Today's agenda includes discussing the learning objectives for this webinar. I'll do a brief introduction of our presenters, but we will do that kind of as we go through this, so they will do that again. We will discuss what crystal meth is and what we currently know about Black gay men and crystal meth use. We will discuss how to frame this discussion in healing justice, how our feelings about substance use have been shaped, and then we will spend some time discussing strategies to support our family, friends, and loved ones who use crystal meth. We will end with a quick Q&A that will be determined by how many questions you ask and how much time we have remaining. So please, like I said, feel free to include questions in the questions panel. So our learning objectives. So by the end of this webinar, you should be able to have some historical context for how substance use has been shaped for Black people. You should learn context for how crystal meth impacts Black gay men in our families. And you should also learn some strategies to support Black gay men who use crystal meth using healing and restoration techniques. I'm so grateful today to be presenting with these other amazing presenters. So it will, of course, be myself, as well as Yolo Akili, founder and executive director of Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, known as Beam. And we also have Jason Zhu, founder of Take Down Tina. So this should be an amazing, amazing conversation. So let's begin. I dare myself to dream. If I cannot vocalize a dream, which is the first step towards its realization, then I have no dream. It remains a thought, a vision without form. I dare myself to dream that our blood is thicker than difference. That's a quote from Joseph Beam from his essay, Brother to Brother, Words from the Heart. I wanted to use that quote to ground us in this discussion today. So like our previous webinar on this topic, we are continuing to turn the page on how we discuss crystal meth in the Black gay community. And part of that is daring ourselves to dream. So what is crystal meth? Crystal meth is crystallized methamphetamine. It is a type of amphetamine, which are a group of synthetic drugs that stimulate the central nervous system. Now, according to the National Institute of Health, give me 1 second. All right. According to the National Institute of Health, some of the common names for crystal meth include chalk, crank, crystal, ice, meth, and speed. Now, not included on the NIH list, but quite prevalent in Black and Brown communities, is the term TINA, which is sometimes shortened to T. This term can also refer to crystal meth. People can consume crystal meth in a variety of ways, including inhaling, smoking, snorting, or injecting. In a 2009 study, let me make a quick note. So at the bottom of, if you see a website at the bottom of your screen, that is a website that you can use to get additional information. So you will see those periodically. So I wanted to put that there for what is crystal meth. And I also wanted to talk about this 2009 study, which was called Methamphetamine Use Patterns Among Urban Black Men Who Have Sex with Men. You can see the link to that particular study down below. Participants in this particular study reported using multiple substances and used on average 9 days within the last 30 days. They had spent an average at that time on about $159 per month on methamphetamine and a median of $398 on all substances. Frequency of monthly methamphetamine use was related, in this case, to the use of powdered cocaine and alcohol, but not the use of other substances. So keep that in mind. Black men who have sex with men primarily used crystal meth in private venues such as homes or in homes of friends and reported obtaining crystal meth from multiple sources. Men who reported exchanging sex for methamphetamine reported greater use in public venues such as sex clubs, sex parties, and circuit parties. So now that we know the basics, how do we frame this discussion? Yolo, I'm going to bring you in to help us with that.
Thank you, Johnny. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. So like Johnny shared, we want to be intentional about saying that we're framing this conversation in something we call healing justice. Now, we're going to spend some time briefly defining, kind of giving some grounding in healing justice, because even though it's been around for about 10 plus years, it's largely been kind of a theoretical or practical application in like grassroots organizing communities, excuse me. So I just want to talk a little bit about what healing justice is. Next slide. Can I switch it? Hey, Johnny, am I able to advance slides?
Yep, you can. I did give you control, so you can advance.
Okay. All right. Awesome. So what is healing justice? So there's a definition present here, but I want to begin by just saying that healing justice as an approach to the work really is grounded in the work of Black, Brown, queer, disabled, and trans women and grassroots communities, right? Grassroots organizing communities, excuse me. And what healing justice is, we have a definition here presented by Prentice Hemphill and Kara Page. But can I go back to that? How do I go back to that slide? Okay, I'm not seeing how do I control? Okay.
I got you covered. I'll take care of it for you, Yolo.
Okay, thank you. Can we go back to the slide briefly? Yeah. Okay, thank you, Johnny. So when we talk about healing justice, there's a couple of points I want to make sure I raise. Is that one, we recognize that individual level intervention in terms of healing is not sufficient enough for our work, right? That we have to recognize that when we talk about healing for our communities, Black and Brown communities, we need to also be looking at systems level intervention. We need to be recognizing that racism, sexism, misogyny are also interlinked in terms of creating trauma and distress for our communities. And we need to also recognize the historic legacy of trauma and harm, right? And so in the definition you see right here, we say that Healing justice seeks to confront and transform historical and intergenerational trauma from oppression, policing, surveillance, colonization, and attempted genocide in our lives. So it goes beyond this kind of Western medical model that says that, like, the individual is the only thing that needs to be addressed, and says that actually the broader systemic issues, the broader generational issues, the broader structural issues of the way in which the culture, capitalism, all these pieces are created must be a part of our analysis and must also be included in terms of how we actually address an issue. Next slide, please. Thank you. And so, I see the slide. So next, just really briefly, this is our model of justice, a little bit about our approach that we take. So when we talk about dealing with any particular issue, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with it, but of course it's available online on our website. But I want to talk really briefly about emotional justice and healing justice in the context of this work. So when we talk about crystal meth use or any substance use in Black communities, we have to start with emotional justice. When we talk about emotional justice as being the acknowledgement and validation of the legacy of harm and untreated trauma. Whenever we're engaging our communities in recognizing that homophobia, transphobia, racism, all these different larger oppressive forces have created a lot of harm in our communities, and people are accessing a lot of different coping strategies to navigate that harm, right? And so, like, recognizing that one, of course, is coping strategies. Sometimes it's just pleasure seeking, right? But when we're talking about coping strategies for distress, we need to acknowledge that's because harm has happened, and we need to start from that place as opposed to this place of shaming and judging, which Johnnie will spend some time talking about. Has been really much so informed by the way in which we've been taught to think about drugs and substances, right? And when we talk about healing justice, it means that now that we know that this harm has happened, we recognize this harm, we go from a compassion-centered place to be able to restructure our communities and our organizations, our conversations, our dialogue, how we are in the world based on that harm. So it means that we shift the way we are because the way in which we've been encouraged to exist and be in the world, whether it's engaging in systems or building systems or being, has been deeply rooted in oppression. And so what do we need to do to kind of do that work? What is that work? It's really what healing justice calls us to kind of engage and begin to think critically about. And then the diagram goes on into reparative justice and transformative justice as well. And transformative justice really being that we need to shift the entire root of how we see these issues, how we see society and culture, to make them center on emotional justice, meaning that the culture is grounded in understanding that harm has happened, and that it's intentionally creating structures and processes and systems that are trying to alleviate that harm, prevent that harm from reoccurring. Just thinking about that in terms of how we're having this conversation, so we don't slip into thinking that it's individual. We talk about substance use; it's not an individual issue. When we talk about people's lives, we're talking about in a broader context that's operating of harm, of systems, etc. And I think I figured out how to go forward. Let me see if I can. Oh, no. But I did. Johnnie, could you advance me?
I do have you covered, Yolo, and I will pick up from here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. So thank you so much for that, Yolo, because it is incredibly important that we understand, because we're dealing with our family and our friends and our loved ones, it was important for us to ground ourselves in this discussion for how we move forward. So when deciding to discuss this topic, it was important that we not just focus on the topic itself, but how over time our feelings about substance use have been shaped. Now, I will say that what I was surprised to learn as I was doing all of this research is how much the media has been used over time, which correlated substance use directly to race, specifically as it relates to Black folks. And we're going to talk about a couple of these examples. So, in 1914, an article was published in the New York Times. Negro cocaine fiends are a new Southern menace. The insinuation in the piece is that poor Black folks, because of prohibition, had taken up cocaine and were committing murder as a result. Now, some of the words used in the article include words like lurid, gruesome, homicidal. And so we needed to get some context here. So here's what we know about that period of time. So There were numerous articles in the early 1900s that exaggerated the association of heinous crimes and Black people with cocaine use specifically. Suspicion of cocaine intoxication was then used as a reason to justify lynchings. Now, all of these things ultimately influenced legislation. So, just so you're aware, I do have the link for this particular article down below, but we have gone one step further. In your handouts section of your control panel, you can go in and download all of the materials for this webinar, and it includes this article. And this framing is incredibly important for how we talk about substance use within the Black community. 73 years later, in the New York Times again, an article was published, New Violence Seen in Users of Cocaine. This particular piece was specifically about crack, and it was written, of course, in 1987, which was in the midst of the crack epidemic of the 1980s. Now, while race wasn't mentioned specifically in this article, it was clear though by using geography that they were talking about Black and brown folks. This article focuses on East Harlem. So, some of the words that appear in this article include violent, erratic, paranoid. In fact, there is a quote in this article by a Dr. Yochanan Weisenfrued, who was the director of psychiatry at Interfaith at that time. Dr. Weisenfrued said, in my opinion, the police should approach a crack addict as they would approach someone with acute psychiatric disorder. That article, including that quote, is included in your resources. And it's incredibly important as we think about how our feelings about substance use have been shaped over time. So today, as we look at what's widely been called the opioid crisis versus the crack epidemic 30 plus years ago, we see kind of a stark difference in proposed resolutions to dealing with the issue. So with crack, as we know, the war on drugs was expanded. We also know that the incarceration rate of Black folks skyrocketed during this time. By comparison, the opioid crisis sees us focusing more on prevention, focusing more on treatment and legislation to protect consumers from companies. Stark difference in how these two issues have been handled. So, as we consider how we interact with our loved ones who are using crystal meth, it's important to understand the context for which substance use has been reported over time about Black folks. So, some of the key words that have been used, okay, or some of the key historical associations have been deviancy, incarceration, immorality, violence, absence. All of these things impact how we show up for our loved ones. And we're also dealing with all of this as we are dealing with other impacts of social and structural racism. So, Yolo, I'm going to go ahead and it looks like there might be a little bit of a delay in terms of moving the slides forward, but I'm going to give you control again so that you can move us forward through the rest of the presentation. So there might be a slight delay as you do it, just so you're aware. Give me 1 second. There you go. Let me see. Yolo, I don't think I can hear you. Let me see. Oh, I can hear you.
All right. First of all, wow.
Yolo, give me 1 second. It appears as though you are extremely low. Let me see what we can do here. Give me a second. I want to go back.
How about now?
That is perfect. We got you.
Okay. Okay. All right. So I think we advanced accidentally a little ahead, but I want to thank Johnny again for bringing that piece in and doing the research to really make sure that we have a background in terms that informs how we feel and how we talk about substances in our communities and what substances we talk about and which ones we kind of like talk differently about. So I think that's really important. We really want to highlight these pieces. So the war on drugs not only destroys family and communities, it criminalizes people, right? For physical addiction. Instead of approaching substance use and addiction, whether for coping or pleasure, as being possibly representative of need for support, for harm reduction education, social intervention, or an issue rooted in other forms of discrimination and distress, what ends up happening is that people become criminalized, right, and not supported. And it's really important that when we talk about how crystal meth in our communities, we recognize it comes in the context of a lot of other substances and a lot of other trauma that has happened, where aunties, uncles, family members, folks that we love and care for have been cast aside, who have been incarcerated. All these different pieces kind of trigger and create a lot of shame in our communities, right? And so that shame and that fear and that anxiety and that untreated trauma around substance use in our community shows up in the ways in which we're able to even be with people that we know who are using substances sometimes, right? There's a lot of moral judgments that happen in this space around like, oh, you're using this, I'm better than you, all these different discourse. It really doesn't help us actually support folks, and whether they're using substances in a way that is helpful for them, or whether they're using substances in a way that is like not helpful, right? So we need to be really mindful of like how our own history and our own ideas and concepts about substance use shows up in our bodies, shows up in the way we communicate, the way we talk, and the way we address the issue. Next slide. Try to do this. Like notes, not gonna let me.
I will take care of it for you.
Okay, I don't know what's going on. I'm sorry.
No problem. Just give it one moment. It should be advancing.
All right. So that to say, once again, to reiterate, it contributes to a culture of shaming, of fear, and stigma towards our community members, right? So I'm speaking from my own experience, having family and community who have used substances, the way in which we don't talk about that, we don't talk about addiction, even though we saw the real consequences of that show up in our family reunions, in our lives, etc. There was a lot of fear and shame and anxiety and judgment. And the question becomes like, how do we interrogate that and shift that and be able to, in order to be able to really heal and also be able to support community members? I think the first step is really acknowledging that it's there. Is being really doing self-inventory and checking ourselves around like how we're thinking about substances, how we're thinking about addiction, and really removing those moral undertones that kind of inform discourse and conversation, and really being like, how can we show people, be present and support folks and wherever they are in their lives. So once again, acknowledging that this shame, this stigma, this fear has really contributed to a lot of psychological despair and distress. It's isolated folks who are using drugs and substances, and it's not actually helped us address the issues, the core root of the issues. Next slide, please. Okay. Okay. All right. So once again, let's just reiterate the last point. So once again, to practice the harm reduction, to really think about healing justice, we begin with ourselves. We begin with our culture in terms of how we talk about substances, how we talk about crystal meth, how we talk about people who are using crystal meth, and how people who are using substances, being really mindful of that. And next slide. So what are the possibilities? Like when we talk about an individual, we talk about crystal meth, we're not just talking about it once again in the individual space, right? We're talking about a broader system level engagement. So one thing we need to talk about is, of course, decriminalization, right? A policy shift. Decriminalizing drugs, decriminalizing drug users, and really recognizing how can we approach substance use addiction from a different space. expansion of peer support and innovative harm reduction models, right? Thinking about harm reduction, something that we know works, but of course, like all the stigma that's surrounding harm reduction, how do we begin to interrogate that and really get policy, legal support for harm reduction much more broadly? Universal health care would be a huge help. Collective rituals and healing support for our communities impacted by the drug war. We need to have more open dialogue about the reality of what has happened in our communities. I feel like as a leading organization of healing justice work, so often we talk about substance use, but we don't see spaces of people to really kind of like express the fear, the anxiety, the loss, the frustration, that has happened in the context of the war on the drugs in our families, in our communities. And if we don't process that, of course, it shows up in different ways. And of course, Narcan and training for professionals, like once again, not just professionals, really for community members in terms of how do we actually prevent overdoses, how do we support folks who are using substances, how do we keep them connected to services, et cetera, and how do we destigmatize substances broadly. So thinking about those as possibilities for the work and what needs to, some ideas for what needs to happen for us to be really able to really address this, the issues that are happening in our community. Next slide. All right. All right, awesome. So for now, I want to invite Jason onto the onto the webinar. Jason, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hey, welcome. Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today.
Absolutely, I appreciate you having me.
Yeah. So today we want to spend some time really getting real and honest and authentic about how do we support folks in our communities who are using meth, right? There's a lot of theoretical pieces floating around, but we really want to get practical and say that, like, what are some things that we as everyday folks can do to show up and support folks who are using meth in their journey and as they're trying to take care of themselves, as they're trying to no longer use meth, wherever they are in their journey, in their path, how do we be present? And so we invited Jason on for this webinar because Jason, of course, is the founder of Take Down Tina. He is also a mental health advocate and a spokesmodel for the DC PrEP campaign. And so he's been really raising a lot of attention, doing a lot of education and information around crystal meth, also called Tina, as well as the intersection of mental health and other issues as well. So we really thought it'd be great to kind of like bring him in to kind of share with us 3 things that he would feel like are really important to think about when we talk about supporting folks who are using that. And so, Jason, thank you again for joining us and being a part of the dialogue today.
Absolutely, thank you. So go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead. Absolutely, yeah.
No, so we can go on to the next slide. So there were 3 pieces, and so I'm just going to like highlight them. And Jason, I would just love for you to kind of like to chime in and just explain why you say this is really, really important and talk to us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first one would be the plant the seed of recovery. It is very important that we start talking about recovery in our community because we're getting to a place of where crystal meth use is becoming socially acceptable. And we do not want that. We don't want this to be confused as something that is done recreational, something that is only done socially. We want to really put the nail in the head here and let it be known that once you try this drug once, the likelihood of you becoming addictive it's great. And we have seen that in people, and even in myself, someone who is recovering from crystal meth. You go through this process of, oh, I'm only doing this on the weekends, it's kind of like a social recreational thing. And the next thing you know, you find yourself deep in addiction. So what we want to do is that when people are, one, being honest about their experiences with crystal meth, because we cannot do anything if people are not honest about, sharing their stories. And I'm noticing that more and more is that people have tried crystal meth, but they don't want to talk about it with their friends and kind of, give their experience on it. And so once that person has, been honest and shared their story and their journey with crystal meth, if there's still someone who is actively using, we want to plant those seeds of recovery. But we want to do it in the sense of not being judgmental, because in our community we can tend to do that. We can tend to be judgmental, and we can tend to be a little bit preachy, and I think that's just from our upbringing as a community. What we want to do is that we want to show supportive engagement, and therefore that way we want to, you know, kind of remind our friends of goals and, you know, things that they want to accomplish, and how they can accomplish that, and how they can gain that freedom is by recovering. And we want to keep on, you know, saying it over and over. And it's not to the point where it's like we want to drill it in them, but we want to be able to let them know that recovery is possible, and that you can live a sober life, because what we believe what is a sober life is boring. And so we want to get people to realizing that recovery is great. Recovery is your freedom. The recovery allows you to process your trauma. The recovery is the rainbow through the clouds. And so that's what we really want to start doing. And by doing that, we can kind of start being supportive and being a positive influence to each other, like my friends did for myself. So I can go on to the next slide if you want me to, because I was about to go right into it. So yes, being a positive influence, I will speak from my my experience. My friends do not use crystal meth, and they didn't judge me for using crystal meth, but what they did was that they provided a positive influence for me, and that's what we have to kind of start doing. We have to start inviting those friends that you haven't heard from in a while to kind of, let's hang out, you know, let's do something other than, you know, going to a bar or going to, you know, smoke pot or whatever, you know, drug activity that, you know, you will frequently do as a friend. Let's do something more positive and uplifting, like maybe exercising, maybe going, you know, doing some hiking or something that is out of the norm. I can speak for myself. I went roller skating, you know, I haven't been roller skating in years, and to feel how much joy you got out of that. So what you want to do is you want to be a positive influence, and also you want to be someone who is not engaging in those behaviors. So what we have to do is, in order for us to be a positive influence, we have to look internally into ourselves and be like, hey, okay, my friend is in this place. How can I do better for myself, and also be a better role model for my friend? And so we have to do that, and also loving them. I know within our community, we love a little shade, and it's great and it's awesome, because it is really fun in the moment, but it is so much power in being genuine and showing that you truly care about someone, because it's uncomfortable, and it's okay to be uncomfortable, because that uncomfortable moment will once again possibly plant that seed to recovery for someone. And so we want to continue doing that, and we want to let them know that, you know, they can have fun, you know, and that's where we really need to get to, is this, instead of trying to get people into these events, you know, by enticing them with alcohol and stuff like that, let's start enticing them with a meaningful experience, you know, something that it's going to be enjoyable, to where they're like, wow, I didn't need any substance to enjoy that moment, because in that moment I was sober and I had fun. And we have to start doing that for our friends, for our family, showing them that recovery is not boring. You can still have a meaningful life, and you can honestly have the best time of your life. I am living in a free life right now, and it's so enjoyable, but we have this misconception of what sober is. And so we need to start changing the narrative and letting people know that, hey, you can do this, you know, it's fun. And all three of those things go hand in hand, and that's how we can move forward for our community, and also bring some harm reduction for future generations. I can't hear you.
Oh, here I am. Here I am.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing your piece and your
absolutely.
story. One piece I just wanted to chat with you briefly about. I love what you shared about recovery. I'd be curious to hear from you, like, when we think about recovery when we're struggling with addiction to a substance, is I think a lot of times people tend to think of it as very linear, right?
Hmm.
That like sometimes people think that like, oh, I'm just going to have this one time and I won't ever like relapse or have challenges. Could
Hmm.
you speak to that a little bit when we talk about that? Because I feel like there's a lot of shame and judgment folks have around like when they use the
Yes,
substances and they can't quote unquote no longer use that substance immediately.
yes, yes. So, speaking from myself, I used to be ashamed of relapse. And I stop being ashamed of it and really start learning the lessons, because you can learn so many valuable lessons from a relapse. And the final relapse for myself was absolutely the time where I was like, you know what, I don't need this. But if we stop thinking about it as a shameful thing, like, oh my God, I'm trying to recover and I should, be not doing this and everything like that. No, it is a reason and why you're doing this, because you didn't get in this drug, just like that. You're not going to get out of it just like that. And so we have to be honest about that. And this path to recovery, you're going to have hiccups. You're going to have hiccups and it's not going to be great. You're not, you're not going to be perfect at it. At the end of the day, we have to realize that we are unable to manage our lives because we are addicts. So that is just not saying through the use of drugs. That is saying through our behaviors, through sex, relationships, through, how we deal with our social aspects. That is the whole aspect of being an addict, because people are not just an addict as far as just drugs. It is your whole life. It is your being. It is who you are. And so once you become comfortable, like I say in my mission statement, we envision a world bursting with self-acceptance. So exchanging one's life for drug use becomes undesirable. We have to get to a point where, we accept ourselves, that this is where we are at this moment, and we are willing to change. But right now we have to understand that we have to go through a road to change, because we've known chaos and we've gone through trauma our whole lives. And so now we're coming into a new place, and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be difficult, and we're going to make a lot of mistakes. And if you get comfortable and accept that you're going to make those mistakes, your recovery chances are greater. But when you feel as though that you feel shamed and, oh, I shouldn't have done this, oh, I wish I could have done that, and you live in regret, then you will keep on going in the same cycle over and over again. And you have to get out of that. You have to be able to say, hey, this is what I did, and move on, because it's always something next.
Absolutely. So powerful. It also makes me think about the piece, really understand that you are more than your addiction, right? Like that piece is really important to like say that like, to identify folks as being more than the addiction, even as addiction is a physical, psychological, emotional challenge, but to acknowledging that that's not all the totality of who we are. Thank you so much. So powerful. So I know we're going to keep you on to like have some more questions.
Yeah,
So if you
absolutely.
can stay on with us. I want to move on to this next piece really briefly. We want to make sure we gave everyone who came on today, and as well as those who were watching the recording, because this was recorded and available, some tools to kind of think about, like, how do I support folks, right? So Jason gave us some great tips, but we also have this really great tool that we use, because, you all know that I love worksheets. I love things that make us think about, like, what I need to be considering. And what we have here is a tool that we have is called the Community Care Support Plan. And what this is simply just like a guideline that we developed that says, when someone that we know in our community is in distress, what is the information that we need to know to be able to support them? What are the things that we need to be thinking about in terms of being able to support them? So if you look at this community care support plan, and it's available actually in your handouts, you can download it. It has information just like knowing emergency contacts, knowing allergies. Sometimes it also has things on there like how do we actually coordinate to support someone who may be suffering with addiction or suffering with some mental health distress, who needs food. How do we actually coordinate check-ins with them? How do we coordinate, like, what are the healthcare providers, or what are the clinics that we trust and the community providers that we trust, right? So once again, it's getting us to think about, like, when we talk about supporting folks, what are the things we need to map out sometimes to support family members and friends. You don't necessarily have to complete it verbatim, but it's really to get us moving and thinking about those strategies and those pieces, because community-based responses, we're the front line, right? So it's so important for us to begin to think about what we need to be doing. I also want to reiterate, and I think Jason, you said this as well, is that sometimes just being present and showing up for folks is such a powerful thing in and of itself. Sometimes people come to me and they're like, well, what counseling strategy do I need? Or what, complex critical skill? And sometimes it's just being present and showing up and listening and validating and hearing folks. And that can be so powerful in the context of not only just addiction, but all the mental health distress and other challenges that folks are dealing with in our community. So being mindful of that, and also being mindful of getting your own support, supporting yourself is really important as well, because when we're supporting people who are distressed, and we're ourselves, of course, in distress, there's also vicarious stress and trauma that happens in the context of that interaction that we have to be mindful for. So this is one tool that we have that you can download and get access to. On the next slide, we have some further resources for other information as well. Access to SAMHSA's helpline, so you can also call the helpline anytime you want to get access to care, information. We also put the National Institute of Drug Abuse, NIDA's crystal meth page. If you want to get some concrete information on crystal meth, I suggest you check out that page. It has links to other resources as well. And then, of course, Party Boy documentary, which is a documentary about crystal meth use in Black and Latinx communities. That's a link to the trailer. Check it out. We'll also be a part of a screening at the Harm Reduction Conference if you're going to be there in New Orleans. But also find out other ways to kind of get access to that documentary and screen that in your community could be a really powerful tool. So that concludes the information part of our webinar. We really want to open it up now with Jason and Johnnie and myself for a Q&A to have a little bit of a dialogue. We have about 19 minutes left. And so we'd love to hear from you all. Like, what are some things that you have questions you have, some tools you have interest in seeing, or just some things that came up for you while you were watching the webinar?
Yolo, this is Johnnie, and thank you both so much for just being part of this and just sharing this really important information. And, there was something that came up. There are so many things that came up for me, right, as through the course of watching this webinar. And one of the questions that was coming up for me, Jason, as you were presenting, was we have these moments in our lives where we go through something challenging, and then we learn something about ourselves as we kind of work through it. I'm curious for you, what was something that you learned about yourself that really fuels you now?
Yeah, so for myself, because I do speak with a trauma therapist, and so we do process a lot. I was diagnosed with HIV at the age of 16. And so I was always in myself feeling like I was strong, and no matter what people said about, my diagnosis, no matter, what they tried to do as far as smear my name and spread that, I was HIV positive, I can move on, no matter how many people, denied dating me because of my status, no matter how many times that I hid myself because I didn't want people to know my status. What I came to realize is that I didn't give myself the opportunity to mourn those experiences. And so when I started to go through the process of mourning and processing and mourning and processing, the things that happened throughout my life, I started to get a new freedom, because then I was like, well, wow, that did happen. I forgot that happened. And I was able to move past it because I was carrying it on me as a heavy load, but I didn't know I was carrying it as a heavy load. And once I realized it, I was able to drop it. And then that's when I became more authentic, more true to myself, because I had already processed that. And so we have a lot of brothers and sisters out here in our community who have not dropped that load off because they just keep on going, because it's like, we don't have time to sit there and, be upset because someone denied us this, or because, this person is being shady and saying this about us. We got to keep going. But what we don't realize is that it's so important to mourn and process that, because then that's when you can actually move forward and not keep on going around in this continuous loop. So for me, that's what I learned,
Jason,
and by far that was the greatest.
Jason, I love what you said. That reminds me of something I often quote from my grandmother. She says, "What you bury in the backyard will one day show up on the front porch." You know, like what you repress will return. So it's either like you take some time to deal with it and navigate it, or otherwise it will come back and deal with you in some way. You know, it's so powerful.
Yes, and that's how I find that a lot of people are getting into crystal meth use, is because of they're not mourning and processing it. You know, we are built to be, you know, strong individuals, and there's nothing wrong with being strong. But at the end of the day, you owe it to yourself to protect the child within you, because no one else, you know, heard that child when it was crying out. No one else, you know, cared about that child when it was hurting. So it is up to you to protect it. And in order for you to protect it, you have to do things to get that freedom so that child can smile again.
Love it.
Wonderful. Thank you both so much. If there are any other questions, individuals can put them into the chat box. Otherwise, if we have an additional question, either Yolo or Jason, we can certainly address that question right now. Well, perfect. I want to thank everyone for joining us for today's webinar. Jason, thank you so much for your fearlessness and the work that you're doing and joining us today. Can you tell folks how to follow Takedown Tina so that they can get more information from you?
Yes, absolutely. So we do have a Twitter page. It is at Takedown Tina. You can follow my personal Instagram page. I mean, my personal Facebook page. I put a lot of information up there. It's going to be Jason, Jacen, Zhu, Zhu. I put a lot of information up there about Takedown Tina, about crystal meth, about, you know, things within the community, being HIV positive and stuff like that. And so that's where you can typically find those resources. You can also email me at takedowntina@gmail.com if you have any questions, or, you know, want to reach out for any purpose at all. You know, also my DMs are open if you are someone who is struggling with crystal meth. I do not mind talking to you about that, because I know it is difficult to navigate, and you really want to connect with someone. So always DM me if you want to, about crystal meth and your journey or HIV.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And once again, everyone, you can download the handouts. They are there in your control panel. And I want to thank you, Lolo. I want to thank you, Yolo, for your amazing information today. And thank everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Have a great day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
You too.
You are. Thank you.
Bye.